I'm Willie Jones, Director of Health, Safety, and Wellness for OACB, and I want to welcome you to our session today. Just one of the final reminders, the annual awards reception will be tonight in the Easton Ballroom from 5 to 6:30. The gold sponsor is Britco, and our silver sponsor is Haynes, Kessler, Myers, and Postalakis. CPDUs, you will receive an email from Member Connect giving you guidance on when to collect your CPDUs, and that should be sometime next week. You'll be able to get that and claim your CPDUs. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Deb for our next session.
Can everybody hear me? I really hate microphones. So at least this one is a lapel, so I don't have to manage with a mic. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Deb Maloy. I have been a registered nurse for about 40 years. So now I am one of those nurses that I looked at years ago and thought, gosh, she's old. So now I am one of those old nurses. I've been in the field for 30 years, a little over 30 years, worked for a private provider for 28 of those years. And about 3 years ago, I had made a decision. I wanted to change my role. I wanted to be able to use my experiences and my knowledge and all that fun stuff over almost 30 years to be able to share that with other people. So at that point, I joined at Tarrytown Expocare Pharmacy, and Tarrytown only serves the IDD population in behavioral health. We do webinars every month for nurses. We have symposiums. We do meal programs. We have a lot of connections with a lot of different organizations, pharmaceutical companies that also provide trainings and different things to help support you and your staff as well. I'm also the current president of DDNA, which is Developmental Disabilities Nurses Association. I've been on the board for about 8 years. We hold an annual educational conference, and in 2024, it's going to be April 18th through the 21st in Orlando, Florida. So I have a flyer for that information, postcard if you guys are interested in joining, and a couple of other things when I talked about the pharmaceutical companies. Has anybody heard of Unspoken Symphony? Okay, this is a product that's free of charge. Anybody can go on to unspokensymphony.com and access this. It's a little art kit. You can order it for your individuals, especially with Christmas coming up. You could use this as a gift for family members. What they do is they create artwork, and then you load it, and then it puts music to their artwork. So it was really, and I do have some samples. So if you guys want some, see me afterwards, and I'll be happy to share those with you. So that's one of the things that we have a lot of different connections, and that is through Jazz Pharmaceuticals with that as well. And on another quick note, does anybody have anybody that is using Epidiolex? Okay, if you are, come and see me, because the makers of Epidiolex is looking at doing a survey to kind of get your input on its effectiveness with that. If you haven't heard about it, let me know, and I'll be happy to put you in contact with some folks. That is a med that has really been very beneficial for a number of individuals with seizures. So without any further ado, what we're going to be talking about today is going to be delegation in challenging times. As we all know, times are challenging right now. How many in here are nurses? Okay. Administrators? Okay. Home managers, program managers, DSPs, social workers, county board? Okay. All righty. So there's a lot of different avenues, and this is approved for nursing CEs, but this is really not just geared for nurses. It's really for anybody to be able to glean some information out of in regards to delegation and kind of what some of the requirements are and so forth. Obviously, this is our scope of practice. Being enhanced, the ability to recognize challenges of delegation and to employ strategies to ensure quality services. I'm required to share that information. So getting right into the brunt of this, my goal is not to go over just all the law and the rule, okay? However, as a nurse, you do need to know what your state board of nursing requires and what you're able to do in regards to delegation, okay? So tell me, is there a difference between delegation and certification? Is there anybody that thinks that there's not a difference? Okay, some of you that may have been around for years might refer to certification as delegation because in years past, everything was delegated. And I still to this day hear people say, are you doing a delegated nursing class? Nope, I'm not doing a delegated nursing class because there isn't a delegated nursing class, okay? If you're talking about certification for your staff to administer meds, then yes. With the delegation, obviously, delegation you are able to do as a nurse through basically the virtue of your nursing license, okay? So when we talk about RN trainers who teach the medication administration course, okay, RNs have to meet the requirements to become certified to be able to teach that course. I don't have to be a certified RN trainer to delegate, okay? I can delegate by virtue of my nursing license, okay? So I think that's important to know, especially from an agency perspective, and even from some nurses, I get questions about that. It's interesting because we do a number of different presentations on delegation, and there's always questions about delegation that follows. So your Ohio Board of Nursing, Chapter 13, all outlines that information in regards to delegation, okay? Nurses need to know what the Nurse Practice Act is. As an RN, you need to know what your scope of practice is. As an LPN, the RN needs to know, but the LPN also needs to know what their own scope of practice is, okay? And not stepping outside those boundaries. LPNs can be involved with the delegation process, okay? They can do what they're permitted to do within their scope of practice. The RN should know and understand what that LPN is doing in regards to those tasks in reference to delegation, okay? So as an RN, I would want to work with my LPN and say, okay, this is my expectation. This is what I want you to do. I want to observe that. I want to make sure that they're following those steps the way I'm expecting it to happen, because ultimately, that delegation is the RN's responsibility, okay? And then the other thing that you need to be mindful of is, does your agency have a particular policy about what you're going to do, what you can do, can't do, as it relates to delegation, okay? So that can vary. I know some agencies that do not work with individuals that need insulin or G-tubes, J-tubes, okay? They only have Category 1 tasks. That's up to that agency about how they manage that piece of that. So who gives the authority for the nurse to delegate? What did we just say? Your license, so your Board of Nursing, the Ohio Board of Nursing is giving you that authority here in Ohio. Nursing tasks are what the Ohio Board of Nursing is authorizing us to delegate, okay? Therefore, we can be delegated to DDPs without requiring certification. Actually, I just seen that typo there, certification. However, when it comes to medications, we can't delegate medication administration. The staff do need to be certified to be able to be delegated for medication administration, okay? Now, the other thing that gets a little tricky in there, when I make a comment about the reference grid that's on the DODD website, do you guys know what I'm talking about? It's the document that's got what your category 1, 2, 3 is and all that, and then your agency down the side. Because G-tubes and J-tubes can be delegated for nutrition and the fluids without a staff being certified. But the staff must be certified to be able to be delegated to administer medications through a G or a J-tube, okay? I will tell you personally, I don't make a big advertisement of that because my concern is somebody thinks they're delegated to do nutrition. Oh yeah, I can do that. And then they just start giving meds and they're not certified. Okay. So that's where the huge difference is with that. I have done that in past when we've had more emergent situations that somebody gets sent home from the hospital. They've got a tube feeding 4 times a day. They've got meds twice a day. Those type of things. We have done that on a temporary basis until we can get the staff through the course and they get that transitioned. Now, what do you do in the meantime with those? What's anybody else done? If you've had meds twice a day, you don't have staff certified to be delegated, how do you manage that person getting the medication through the G-tube or J-tube? What's anybody done? Come on, guys. I know it's afternoon. What's that? That's if you've got it set up that way. You might have nurses that are going out and doing that. You might have a home health agency that you can get to do that. Personally, I would say good luck with that because we don't see home health coming out and doing the things that we did once upon a time. That's a challenge. I actually just talked to an agency last week that they were on Wednesday afternoon, Thanksgiving Eve, were being informed that their individual was coming back home with a brand new G-tube that was just put on Monday, and their delegating nurse said she could be there on Friday. Like, okay, well, I can't make her go there. But what I would tell you is you talk to the hospital and tell them that's a safety issue. I don't have the ability to get that set up. Of course, you know, and typically what do we hear on the hospital side? Oh, I can train him. We can train him, which is exactly what they were being told. And I said, oh, no, they can't. So anyways, they ended up maintaining the person, much to their chagrin, I'm sure. But the person wasn't getting discharged. And sometimes you kind of have to play that card because it's a safety issue. I'm not taking that responsibility. Do you, as the hospital, want to take that responsibility for discharging that person? Because I don't have the ability to provide the service that that person is going to require. Okay, this is just the link for the codes for Chapter 13, which is in regards to delegation. Delegating nurse, the RN and the LPN, again, is authorizing that person who is not otherwise authorized to perform that task. Okay, so we're transferring that responsibility. We're transferring that accountability to that unlicensed personnel to administer that med to perform that task. Okay. In regards to employment, that nurse might be employed by the agency, or they might be a contract nurse, or it might be through an organization. Okay, so there's a variety of different ways that that can happen to get those supports in place. Obviously, assessing and training is the responsibility of the nurse. Okay, so the RN has to oversee that. The LPN can be engaged in that process. We do need to make sure that before we're delegating that task, that there is no judgment that's required. Okay. What's your thoughts on sliding scale and delegating sliding scale? Can you do that? And I've had some people that tell me, no, you can't. And it's like, tell me why you can't. Because it says if the blood sugar is this, you give this many units. So yes, it has to be very specific in regards to that, but it can be delegated. Okay. That's not a judgment. I've got clear parameters. This is what happens. This is what I give. The results are reasonably predictable. This one I always kind of think tongue in cheek because there's a lot of times when you're administering insulin that it could potentially not be predictable. But obviously somebody that's very brittle diabetic is a little bit different scenario than somebody that's pretty status quo, just maybe once a day long acting insulin, and so forth. There is no complex observations or decisions. I don't have to go back in and keep repeating an assessment on the person to make sure that they're stable, okay? And if it's not done properly, the consequences are not life-threatening. And again, that's kind of another one for me, especially when it comes to insulin, not life-threatening. There was a case that we had an individual that was delegated to administer insulin and gave a much larger dose because they got interrupted and stopped the sequence of their event. And the person ended up getting way too much insulin. Now, fortunately, yes, they ended up, it's like, call 911. And so that person was sent out to the ER. Fortunately, there wasn't any negative outcome from that standpoint. And that was a very fortunate situation. But things do happen, okay? And that's, again, kind of going back to the situation of the staff following those step-by-step directions and clearly understanding what they need to do in the event something happens, okay? And who are they calling? So you need to have the verbal step-by-step that I'm reviewing that with the person. I need to have that in writing so that person has something to reference back to know what's going on with that individual. And what do I need to do with that? Statement of delegation for each person. There was a case that I had gone into, and there was one statement of delegation in that agency that covered everybody. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Doesn't work like that. So every person has their own statement of delegation, not one per agency. Obviously, observing and documenting that there's a satisfactory demonstration, a return demonstration. And sometimes those can get a little tricky because if you've got something that is just a PRN of that, that's can get a little challenging on how are you managing that, okay? Because you may not be 2 minutes away that when that happens, you can go and delegate that task, okay? You know, COVID had a lot of things, not necessarily fun things, not necessarily great things, but it did teach us to really get a little more engaged from the technology standpoint. So there are some things that, yes, we can look at doing. We can be another pair of eyes. You know, I've had cases where delegated a staff and I felt they were fine. They were just nervous, but they were questioning themselves. And so it's like, okay, you know what? The first time, let me know, when are you on duty again? Okay, I want you to call me. We're going to FaceTime and I'm going to be right there with you. Okay. I was comfortable that they could do it and they knew the information. They were just very nervous about doing it. And if you think about that, a lot of our population, a lot of our workforce are younger individuals coming in, some fresh out of high school, 18, 19-year-olds. And the first time that they're on duty on a Saturday evening by themselves, how do you think that would make them feel? How would you feel? Even as a nurse, the first time that you were out there on your own and doing something, you kind of second guess yourself and it's like, oh my gosh, I hope I'm doing that right. So we need to think of those things and be able to provide that support. Always being accessible through some form of telecommunication. Now, I will tell you, telecommunication, and this is really, yes, the delegating nurse needs to be available, but certainly needs to be available during the time that the task is being performed, okay? When they say they called the nurse at 2 a.m. because they're out of bread for breakfast, that's really not a delegated task, but have you all gotten one of those calls? Am I the only one who's gotten one of those calls? So yes, there's a lot of different things that we can do with that. One of the things that I will tell you that can be a frustration is when the staff is saying, well, I called the nurse and she never called me back. Okay, I have no missed calls. I have nothing from you. And then if they said, well, we have a log that they're supposed to log the calls. Well, there's nothing on the call log. Okay, so sorry, nobody called me. Okay. If the delegating nurse determines unlicensed personnel is not correctly performing, you have a responsibility to halt that activity. Okay. As a nurse, this can get challenging because then you also have situations where there is nobody else to cover that shift. You might get some pressure from the agency side because, or the manager. You might add, and these are all things that I have heard over the years, believe me. Well, I don't have anybody else to cover. You can't pull them off of MedPass. It's like, yes, I can. And I'm sorry, but we got to figure something out. There are tasks and there are certain things that, yes, we can delegate. There is no list per se of the tasks you can delegate, but there is some items listed through DODD that says we cannot delegate those. Even though as a nurse I could, but DODD says I cannot. Okay, those are going to be your IVs, any of the injectables. I think it's on, gosh, I think it's on page 36 now. Used to be a different page. I don't remember what the page number is in the category 1 curriculum that tells you what those items are. There are some injectables, obviously, with insulin, EpiPen, glucagon, metabolic glycemic injections. Those things we can delegate, but anything else, no, we can't. And that's where we need to be very careful with staff when we're delegating, because when somebody gets an injection that's supposed to happen every 90 days or something else because they can do an injection, they think they can do this injection too. Nope, you can't. Okay, it's very, very specific. Things that are a nursing task, we can delegate, providing that the Ohio Department of DD has not said that we can't delegate it. An example of that is a straight cath. And I have delegated a straight catheterization before. Okay, so I actually had an agency some years back that was considering delegating some tasks with dialysis. Nothing I would have ever done, because number one, I don't have that background, but I think that nurse that was considering it had some background with dialysis. I don't know whether they went through with it or not, but that's their decision to make. One of the things with the DSP role, number one, is they've got to be willing to be able to take on that task of delegation. They need to understand that they're responsible for that. And they are not protected by the nurse's license. Okay? And over the years, I have heard people say that. Oh, I'm under her license. Doesn't matter. No, you're not. You can't drive on my license. You can't practice nursing on my license. Okay? So they need to understand they have a responsibility with that as well. And when I have them sign off on the statement of delegation, I'm telling them, you're signing this, that you're in agreement, that you're doing these steps that I've given to you, and you're taking that responsibility to perform this task the way you've been directed to do it. And if you have any change, any concern, your responsibility is to pick up the phone and call me. Okay. Direct care staff, obviously, they can be independent providers. They can work for an agency, different avenues with that as well. And depending on whether they're employed by the agency, whether they are an independent provider, depends on how that's handled. You also have family delegation, which is another piece of that. And that makes a difference if there's family delegation in regards to an independent provider versus agency providing that in that setting. The staff need to be trained on the task, step-by-step directions. They're able to demonstrate to me and that they're taking ownership of that task at that point with that. Now, the nurse needs to assess that person at minimum annually. Okay? Some nurses may say, you know what, I'm going to assess everybody every quarter. That's kind of up to that nurse, whether they, what they want to do with that. I don't see that the majority of the time. Obviously, if they're administering medications, they have to be certified through the Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities. Okay? Documentation on a MAR, documentation on a treatment administration record, and all of those are the things that are gone through with that delegating nurse and how that needs to be managed, how that's documented, and so forth. Now, communication. The delegating nurse must be contacted for any questions or changes in the health of the person. Difficulty with staff turnover. Now, one way you can look at it is that's some job security for you. Because every time you turn around, you got to go back out. I got somebody else I got to delegate. Okay. It can be time consuming. It can be frustrating. But we also need to be mindful that what we're trying to build is a relationship with that DSP. Okay. I've had cases in over the years that staff have said, you know, and I'd say, well, why didn't you call the delegating nurse? And it's like, have you ever called her? And it's like, well, no, I don't have a need to. Why? Well, because she sounds like a grump every time I call her. She sounds mad every time I call. So, you know, being mindful of those things, you know, when we're getting calls at 2 o'clock in the morning, even if it is for a loaf of bread, doesn't matter. You know, being aware of those things and being aware of that relationship, because I want to be able to have that person to be able to be comfortable to be able to pick up the phone and call me. So when they really need, and there really is something going on, they've got a comfort level to call me and ask. One of the things is not assuming that no news is good news. And that's kind of an old adage of no news is good news, but not necessarily. Because sometimes when you find out and you think, gosh, I haven't heard anything, isn't that great? Until you go look and you're like, oh my gosh, this is a mess. So previous nurses' guidance or directives, I ran into that. Well, the old nurse said this, or well, that's what we did for years because that's what our old nurse told us to do. Okay, well, I'm not the nurse that was here previously, and you need to follow these guidelines, and you need to work through that process with folks. Calling, checking in, stopping in, everything doesn't have to be announced. You can stop in at any time if you're delegating a task. And there are some agencies that have issues with that because they want you to tell you, well, you need to schedule that with the home manager or whatever. And it's kind of like, no, I really don't. So those are things you have to work through. And then this talks more about the family delegation, and that's a whole section in family delegation itself because it's very specific as to what qualifies and who qualifies in regards to the family delegation piece. And I always use the similarity or the, it's kind of like hiring a babysitter. I get an independent provider. Now, that doesn't work if you're employed by an agency, okay? It works if you're an independent provider. Family hires you, you come in, and this is like, okay, this is Sally, these are the meds she takes, blah, blah, blah. I'm giving directives like I would to the babysitter for my kids, okay? Similar to that. This is just some more information about that. What I really kind of want to get to is more about some of the challenges. So health and safety, obviously the individual first and foremost. That's going to be our primary concern, is getting the individual and them being our priority. The employee and the nurse, and I don't say this from a negative standpoint, but as the nurse, you are in control, okay? That is your responsibility. That is your nursing license that you are protecting in making the decision whether you're going to delegate a task or not. That doesn't always make it easy when you're dealing with the agency, because the agency may have their primary concern is like, oh my gosh, I got to get these staff delegated because I don't have anybody else to cover this, okay? But from the nursing side of it, you need to be able to work together and see eye to eye with that and understand where the nurse is coming from, because ultimately that nurse, who is most generally an RN trainer, they're thinking of all the curriculum things in the back of their mind, all the things that need to be in place, all the things that staff need to do, but also protecting themselves. And I don't say that to the point that I want people to like, oh my gosh, I can't do anything. I'm not delegating anything because that's my license. Okay. If you are a reasonably prudent nurse and you're doing what you should be doing, then it shouldn't be an issue. Now, if you go rogue and you're doing something totally off the wall, then you would need to be concerned about that. Sometimes we just need to kind of look at reprioritizing and kind of what we used to, maybe how we did things prior to COVID is a little bit different, because I think we also have a little bit different mindset. We do a lot more things remotely. We've got a lot of technology that we can enlist the assistance of to try and help be another pair of eyes. And I'm not saying it's taking the place of all of that, but those are ways that we can assist in that process. But also it's about thinking outside the box. Personally, I'm not the person that's going to say, oh my gosh, no, we can't delegate that. I'm going to be the one that's like, okay, well, let's think about this. Can we do? What can we get in place? Can we get a home health nurse to get in here at least once a day and provide the task? And hopefully, I'm not offending anybody that's working with a home health agency, but a lot of times the home health agencies don't have that deep background, and they deal with things from a different avenue than we do on the DD side, because they can just teach any family member. Doesn't matter who it is, okay? They can do things with orders as nurses that they can't just tell our staff to do, okay? So there are differences with that. But we do need to kind of think outside the box. Is there a way that we can get a home health nurse in here to at least do one of those tasks, or maybe two of those a day? And we have the other staff, we have staff do the other 2 times, or the one other time, that we're eliminating the amount of time that our unlicensed personnel are doing some of those tasks, okay? And I say that tongue in cheek, guys, because I know that's not an easy thing to do. That's not an easy thing to find. So when we're saying delegation is not an option, then what's our alternatives? And it's not that we should just say, okay, yep, we can't delegate. You need to work with the agency. You need to work with the county board. You need to work with the team of like, okay, I have concerns about this because. So let's think about what can we do as an alternative, even if it's something that's a temporary situation. And I kind of struggle with that, because when you've got an individual that you've been providing services for 10 years, and now all of a sudden something's happened, and we're saying, let's send them to a rehab, let's send them somewhere else temporarily until we can get things straightened out. In the long run, that might be a better option. Sometimes it's not, and there might be behavioral issues. There's going to be all kinds of things that can happen with that. But can we work with the organization? Can we work with the agency to try and figure out what is appropriate? Safety of delegation, and again, you know, kind of telecommunication options, things that we can maybe look at doing, whether it's just FaceTiming with somebody to be a pair of eyes, or be that little voice over their shoulder to make sure that they, hey, look, you got this. You're okay. You're fine. You know, I've had cases where I'd say, look, you're on duty. When are you on? You're on tomorrow afternoon at 3. Okay, I want you to call me before you do this task, and I'm going to have you walk me through what you're doing. Okay? Because I want you to be able to feel comfortable with it. And then I'm going to stay on the phone while you're actually doing it. Okay? So I'm going to be there to help you to make that person feel a little more comfortable. And then obviously when something's not appropriate, what are we doing about that? What are alternatives? What are the challenges? Talked about safeguarding your license, but we need to be careful that it's not impeding that. Say, oh, nope, not on my license. What are the alternatives? Again, agency policy, board of nursing. And in some cases, you just kind of have to stand your ground and say, look, I'm not okay with that. I'm not comfortable that this is going to be okay. Okay. If in doubt, ship them out. How many is familiar with Station MD? Is anybody in the pilot that's in Ohio? Okay. Station MD, for anybody that's not familiar with it, and they have a booth out there, is an organization that basically, that is a great alternative. It's a great resource that prevents us from necessarily having to send our people to the ER and sit in the ER for hours and hours. They have a lot of different assessments, different things that they can do to assist in that process. So, and help evaluate that. They can prescribe, they can do different things, and try and assist with that. So again, you know, delegation, thinking outside the box, what are the options? And I would love to be able to sit here and say, okay, yes, if this happens, this is what you do. But every case is so very individual. I'm not sure where that list would come from. That list would probably be a mile long. License requirements, your board of nursing, reading it, knowing it. And just when I teach the medication administration courses, I don't expect staff to be able to rattle everything off the top of their head. Because in reality, in a minimum of 14 hours, is that realistic? No. I'm more impressed that somebody knows where that curriculum is and knows to go find the information when they have a question than to be able to tell me or make something up or they act like they know it. And it's like, okay, that is so not right. Let me show you. This is the curriculum. Okay. Knowing the delegation requirements and the don'ts, and again, you know, the different things with that piece of that. One of the things that I do want to, you know, with the don'ts, and actually I think I have it maybe on the next slide. Nope, on down here. Anyways, assessing, care plan, responsibility, accountability, the nursing tasks. Obviously, our staff cannot do dose calculations, injectable meds, through a non-permanent tube. And I will tell you that I had a case of a gentleman who, his wife was the guardian of his brother-in-law. And they were providing services in the home. They were independent providers. And so I kept asking about as far as, do you have a delegating nurse? And I explained. So what I'm saying is this. Oh yeah, we got a nurse. Yeah, she's going to do our training, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay. So the guy comes through the category 1 medication administration course. And I had my questions of like, I'm not sure if he's going to make it through. He did. Well, then he needed to come to category 2 certification course. And so I'm asking about the tube and the delegation. Once again, yes. And explained, I said, okay, this is what I'm asking. It's not just a nurse from a hospital. It is a delegating nurse that's going to be, yes, she's going to be available for us to call her, blah, 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 blah. So again, wasn't sure how he was going to do with the category 2. Came through the class, passed, and went about his business. A couple weeks later, I got a call from the local county board because he said that he told the nurse it was an NG tube. I said, oh, absolutely not. I said, because number one, I know what I say when I teach the category 1 class, and I know what I say when I teach the category 2 class. And I checked with the nurse that was helping in the class, and she said, he never said a word about that. And I said, there was never any mention. I said, matter of fact, I had specific conversation in regards to a delegating nurse and not just a nurse from the hospital. And lo and behold, it was a nurse from the local hospital that had said that, yes, they could call her anytime. So I never think about it until I'm talking about it. I want to go back into MAIS and see, is he still in there? Is he still certified? So I don't know what happened in that case. I wasn't involved with it other than the class. So obviously, as far as there are specifics in regards to orders, in regards to certification 1, certification 2, certification 3, and what people are permitted to obtain versus what the nurse needs to do. Now, this initial medication doses, there are some states, and I didn't know this until a couple years ago, that when the person has that medication prescribed for the very first time, a nurse has to go administer that medication. Thankfully, that's not in Ohio. It is in Texas. So anyways, just interesting things. Obviously, agency policy, planning for competency. And I think that can be a challenge in and of itself, because I have had cases where people are like, oh yeah, I got it. That's kind of like, yeah, you're telling me you got it, but you need to show me that you've got it. Okay. So again, that technology might be another way. Drop-in visits of checking on somebody and seeing what's going on, what's really happening. You know, times where you may be at a site and you're really not there to watch delegation, but you're watching delegation and what's happening with staff passing those meds. Even if it's a task that they're not doing delegation, because if they're not passing, let's say you've got somebody that's, you're delegating insulin, okay, but you're not delegating oral med pass, but you happen to be there during that time and you see that. And I'm sure every one of you nurses have seen when you go into a home, you've got the MAR, you're looking through it. Staff are over here getting ready to pass Sally's meds. And it's like, would you like this? Oh no, I know what she takes. Oh, wrong answer. No, you need this MAR. So, if they're not doing that and they're doing that right in front of you, what are they doing when you're not there? Okay. At least the same thing, if not worse. Delegation isn't always easy. It's not always fast. And just because you delegate or can potentially delegate doesn't mean you should in all cases. Okay. There are times that you may say, I'm not comfortable with that. And this is why. Okay. We shouldn't just go in and say, nope, I'm not delegating that. We need to give our reasons why are we not. And then what are we doing to try and help that situation that we could potentially delegate that task. Okay. And maybe I don't delegate a person, and it might take me several trips to delegate a staff person. Okay. It's not a one and done. Okay. Gotcha. You're good. We do need to recognize staffing issues, and we do need to deal with them. And those are really going to be on a case-by-case basis as well. That's going to depend on what's the situation, what's the staffing, what's the task that's being performed. Okay. All those different pieces and parts of things that we need to be in tune to. So I talked earlier about job security, and even though that can be very frustrating, okay, because you think, oh my gosh, I was just out there 2 days ago and now they've got another new staff person or another staff person. And what's difficult is when you find out after the fact that a staff didn't show up, somebody else showed up who's not even certified, let alone not delegated. And it's like, guys, you can't do that. You've got to have a backup plan. It's got to be somebody who's certified. It's got to be somebody that's delegated. I might be able to pinch hit in a situation that somebody's certified that I haven't delegated. But if they're not certified and I can't do that, there's not a thing I can do about that. Okay. When somebody's got PRN glucagon and there's no staff that's delegated to do that, you can't call the supervisor that lives a half an hour away to come in and do that, or you're going to be dealing with a neglect situation. Okay. So trying to work through that. And believe me, I understand it's a frustration on both sides, but how do we kind of meet in the middle with some of these things? And maybe there's some cases that we just temporarily say, look, you know what? We're not delegating this task. We've got to figure something else out because this isn't working. It's not safe for the individual. We're not meeting their needs. It's not safe for the staff. It's not safe for you as an agency. The relationship building, and I talked a little bit about that earlier, it is a two-way communication. We've got to be able to feel comfortable to be able to pick up the phone and talk to a staff and say, hey, I'm just checking in. How are things going? What kind of questions do you have? But I would also encourage you to ask very specific questions. Is there any change in orders? Has anything changed? Has she been to the doctor lately? Okay. Get very specific. That's kind of like telling a staff member to keep an eye on them. What's that mean? What am I looking for? I have no idea. So we want to be very specific about what that means. This is what I want you to look for. Okay. If their color changes, if their mood changes, if they get quiet, if they do, whatever, if the person gets upset and they start to pace, that's their indication that they're in pain or something's happening with them. Getting very specific about that and not just expecting for them to keep an eye on and when something changes, because they may not have a clue what that means. Talk with staff. If you don't hear from them, again, the no news is good news is not necessarily a good thing. And again, just the step-by-step directions and all those things. Sometimes when we've got DSPs, we've got individuals that are there. It's a temporary job. I'm taking this job because it's what was open. It's not really what I want to do. We also have a lot of great staff that are lifers. And they do these jobs because they love it. Okay. They love the people they work with. They love the individuals. They love their coworkers, all kinds of different things. Okay. They love their careers. And we need to recognize that, and we need to praise them as well. even from a nursing standpoint, okay? That's not just the employer's responsibility, that's everybody's responsibility. Because man, if I got a great person that I'm comfortable with delegating, I might want that person to work 24/7. But we also know that's not always possible. Well, it was possible because it happened and probably still continues to happen. When you've got individuals that work multiple sites, those are things that we also need to be in tune to, okay? If you've got persons that float around, then I need to get to those people as well and get them delegated. The more people, the bigger pool I've got to pull individuals from, the better, okay? Avoid giving the sense of authority. And I say that because we need to stand our ground. We need to know what we're doing from the nursing standpoint, but we also need to be aware of that I'm not coming in that I am like Hitler, that you are going to do this or else, or threatening. You keep doing that, I'm going to put you on a med-pass deferral. You know, some cases people might say, woohoo, I'd be okay with that. Give me a break. I don't have to worry about it. They can't pull me to cover that shift because I'm not delegated right now. Okay. And I'm not trying to make light of anything, guys. So please don't take that to heart with that. I mean, those are realities. Those are things, and people do think that way. Okay. That is realistic. Looking at the temporary staff, helping people gain the confidence. And again, that kind of goes back to, I got an individual that might be on duty for the very first time on a Saturday evening, a 19-year-old that just finished up 2 weeks of training, went through the medication administration course, went through a Cert 2 class, and now got delegated on Friday afternoon. And here I am on duty by myself, 4 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. So being supportive, help them and get them. And you might make some lifers out of some of those individuals because they may really be interested in it. They may really have found their calling. Avoiding shortcuts. Everybody takes shortcuts where you can find shortcuts. Okay. Delegation, passing medications is not one of them. People need to follow the guidelines. People need to follow the step-by-step directions that's in the curriculums. Okay. When you've got your step-by-step directions of all those 22 steps to administer oral medications, we need to be following those steps. Now, realistically, do I expect somebody to stand there and regurgitate to me 22 steps? This is step number 1. This is step number 2. No. But am I getting the basics? Are they washing their hands? Do they have the MAR? Are they doing the 3 MAR check? Are they using the DOT system, which is not a requirement, but I would strongly encourage anybody and everybody to use that DOT system. Okay? Which you cannot use with an EMAR system, guys. That has been tried, but it doesn't work. Can't put a dot in the EMAR system. Again, following those, getting to know the individuals and know what their needs are as well. Develop training. You can have standard, or you may have to create some training. Okay. We have step-by-step guidelines in the curriculums. Use them. Pull those out, and you can adapt those if it needs to be adapted. Don't reinvent the wheel. Okay. But there are times that certain things that we do need to adapt, create, and work with other nurses that you know and say, hey, do you already have this? I'll trade you for this if you give me this. We need to be very clear about what those step-by-step directions are. Again, making sure that that is in layman's terms. We're not, nurses. We need to stop talking nursey, okay? We need to make sure that we're getting that information in terms that they can understand. We need to acknowledge that we've got and realize we have new staff that's coming into a field that they are hearing a lot of language. They're hearing a lot of acronyms. If you can put an acronym to anything, the field of IDD does it. Okay. So think it's like going to a foreign country and trying to decipher what their foreign language is. Okay. Same thing. So be cautious of what we're using with those. Building relationships, making sure and feeling staff to feel comfortable that they understand and they can pick up that phone and call the nurse if they've got a question. I don't ever want to make somebody feel like they have a stupid question. And sometimes I've had people say, I'm calling and this is probably a stupid question. It's like, there is no stupid question, because if you have a question about it, that's a realistic issue. Understanding, following up, first attempt does not mean you can never be delegated. Okay. So I might go out and try and delegate Jane today, but Jane's just not on it today, or I've got a concern about it. I want to spend some extra time with her. Might take multiple visits. Call the nurse. Again, communications, encouraging that. Talked about the first time being solo. One of the things that is difficult is trying to get staff to understand that if they get interrupted in the middle of that, they need to stop passing meds, do what they need to do, secure those meds, all that stuff, and go back to it. Don't try to keep answering a staff person, an individual that's coming in while you're trying to set up those meds and do that task. You've got to focus on that. Does everybody know Alex's story that's on the DODD website? Okay. I showed that in the classes that I teach. I've shared that with multiple states to use as a training opportunity. I want staff to understand that their, as Alex's mom says, their life is in your hands. And it is. What I will tell people is that I want you, before I show that, I want you to think about Alex being your son, your brother, your nephew, your best friend's son. I want you to think about him being a family member. And I want you to think about that as you watch this. And at the end of it, I'll say, I'm pretty confident the staff didn't go to work that day thinking she was going to kill somebody. And that sounds pretty harsh, but in reality, that's what happened. Because one of those steps somewhere in that process wasn't followed. And it's very easy to think that'll never happen to me. That'll never happen to me. And a lot of times it doesn't. But in those few cases that it does, I don't want to be in that. I don't want to be the source of that video. And I don't think any of the staff want to be the source of that video. Checking schedules, talking to staff when they're going to be on duty, looking at those things, again, being additional supports with that. Pleasant and inviting. Okay. I want people to be able to talk to me. I want them to be able to ask me questions and not feel stupid. Okay. Or think that their question is a dumb question, or that they've asked it for the third time. Now, maybe if you ask me for the 20th time, it might start to feel a little different, but we need to make sure, as far as with compliance, we want to avoid any negative outcomes, and we certainly absolutely want to avoid death of an individual. Okay. And those things are all realistic, that those are things that can indeed happen. One of the big things for me is looking at the process of what was done prior, a quick in and out, looking at, do we need to do more visits? Do we need to do more calls? And not using judgment with that. You know, this is what it is. Let's work through it. Okay, let's figure out what we need to do to get better. It's also very important to recognize everybody makes mistakes. Is there anybody in this room that has not ever made a mistake? As a nurse, have you made a med error? Yep. Nurses aren't perfect. Doctors aren't perfect. Pharmacists aren't perfect. There isn't anybody that's perfect. But what we do need to do is that when we've got an issue, I encourage people, it is a whole lot better to pick up the phone and call me and tell me that you screwed up, that you made an error, than it is to try and sweep it under the rug and hope nobody ever finds out. And then you've got a really bad negative outcome as a result of that. So those are things that we do need to be aware of. We do need to look at, you know, obviously reporting errors. Anytime that there is something's not in compliance, if there's an infraction of any of the 6 rights of medication administration, that requires an incident report. And those incident reports need to be reported. Okay. Now, if I've got an individual staff person that they haven't signed off 3 times this month, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm reviewing the MAR, missed 3 and it's the same person, then I may look at that information and I might look at putting a notation in that person's file in the state's database, okay? Or I might decide that I'm going to put that person on a MedPass deferral, which means I am temporarily suspending their ability to administer meds, okay? Now, the thing you do need to keep in mind is, are you doing a MedPass deferral that's halting all their activity, or am I just halting a delegated task, okay? So those are kind of 2 different situations. They can be 2 different situations depending on what's going on, what you're doing, what you're delegating, what you're not delegating. Root cause analysis is a very big part of that. What are we looking at? When we see the same thing happening over again, are we trying to get to the root of the problem? Are we really trying to figure out what it is? Because maybe it's not the staff person at all. Maybe it's the way something's coming printed. Maybe it's a directive. Maybe something's unclear. Something was not right in the step-by-step that the nurse gave to them, okay? Let's look at those things and try to figure out. And is it the same person, or is it multiple people? Because if it's multiple people, then I think it's more of a systemic issue versus a single person. Like, okay, Sally's just not getting this. And how many times do you keep retraining Sally? I don't know. It depends. Again, all very individual based with that. But looking at correcting it on all levels of management, and you need to have the support of management. So the nurse with the agency has got to work closely together in all of those tasks, okay? And an understanding with that and coming to a common goal. And ultimately the outcome is, do you delegate or do you choose not to delegate? And if you are already delegating, do I halt that delegation and decide we need to figure something else out? So it is 3:14. Woo! What's some of the biggest concerns you guys have? Is there any questions that you have for me that I can help answer for you? Or you just say, oh, you know what? We got an extra minute. I'm out of here. I'm okay with that. You can come up and talk to me individually if you want to.
Do we have any questions from online?
Okay, I'm either really boring, I either did really well, or you're just ready to get the heck out of here. Or all of the above. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy your afternoon.